The day Belle Thornwick came to believe my family's lake, a century-old inheritance, was the rightful property of her cherished son, was the very day she initiated a conflict with the wrong kind of rancher. It was 6 a.m. 3 police cruisers tore up my driveway, their tires kicking up gravel with the sound of machine gun fire. The odor of diesel fumes mingled with the still warm morning coffee in my hands, and through it all, the HOA president was recording me from her immaculate Range Rover. Nearly drooling as officers swarmed my porch, she had reported me for trespassing on property my great-grandfather had homesteaded back in 1887. Her son, an Instagram influencer, had been charging strangers $200 a head to fish on my private lake, the very same waters that hold my grandmother's ashes. Then, this Mama Karen produced fabricated documents, asserting that I was unlawfully obstructing access for the community. But Belle committed one crucial error. She was completely unaware that I held sway over the budget for every single service that kept her flawless little subdivision operational. Leave a comment. Have you ever felt the urge to utterly ruin someone who attempted to steal from your family? And let me know where you're tuning in from. I enjoy seeing my ranching community spanning the nation. My name is Garrett Holloway, and this is the tale of how a suburban HOA president attempted to seize my family's heritage and discovered why you should never challenge a rancher who is well-versed in his rights. This is 2,400 acres of Montana heaven, sculpted from the wilderness by my great-grandfather, Augustus, in 1887. That includes the 12-acre, spring-fed lake where he erected our first cabin. It is the place where 4 generations of Holloways have been born, grown up, and been laid to their final rest. The steam from my morning coffee blends with the crisp mountain air, the leather of my saddle groans under my weight. Meadowlarks sing across the pastures. This is more than just property. It is a legacy. When my grandma Eleanor passed away 3 years ago, we spread her ashes at dusk in the spot where she used to sit shelling peas while watching her grandkids swim. On quiet evenings, the sound of water lapping against those smooth stones seems to carry the echo of her laughter. I am 45, divorced, and have been living by myself since my daughter Skylar went off to college. I have been working this ranch since I was old enough to handle the reins. I intend to spend the rest of my days here. I never dreamed some HOA queen would wage war on everything my ancestors built. 5 years ago, the landscape changed. A developer purchased the adjacent tract, vowing rural harmony while instead packing 200 McMansions onto lots the size of postage stamps. They named it Whispering Pines Estates. Like a fool, I granted them an emergency vehicle access easement, just trying to be a good neighbor. That was the moment Belle Thornwick crept into my life like a rattlesnake in designer clothing. She's in her late 40s, with blonde highlights that cost more than my entire monthly feed bill, and she drives a Range Rover that has never touched a speck of real dirt. A real estate agent married to some bank vice president. She's the type who says the word agriculture, as if it were a contagious illness. Her grievances began almost immediately. The smell of cattle was disrupting her dinner parties. My native prairie grasses were an eyesore from her kitchen window. Could I please mow them to make things look more professional? I just laughed. That was a big mistake. Then, her precious son Tucker found my lake. He's a 22-year-old Instagram influencer with the work ethic of a dead possum, and he began bringing his friends over for content creation. A term I use very loosely. Diesel trucks roared down my access road at sunrise. Beer bottles shone among the cattails. Electronic music blared, overpowering the bird songs that had existed long before his family line. But what started as tolerance quickly became trespassing. Trespassing soon morphed into a business. Professional cameras and buzzing drones appeared, as Tucker started charging $300 for exclusive Montana wilderness access. He posted about my family's private lake as though he had inherited it from a distant forefather. The reek of his entitlement was more pungent than fresh manure. That's when Belle played what she thought was her winning hand, an evening knock, and she was there with a manila folder and that condescending smile that makes your skin crawl. "Garrett, I've conducted some historical research," she said, her voice oozing with false concern. The original homestead documents included recreational water rights for the township's residents. She laid out photocopied papers on my kitchen table, her manicured nails pointing to what looked like official county clerk stamps. "We simply must honor community traditions." I'd reviewed enough legal papers in my lifetime to recognize an amateur forgery. Her documents made reference to Whispering Pines Township, which was a nice touch, except her subdivision wasn't established until 2019. My great-grandfather's homestead was 132 years older than that. But I also recalled my grandfather's wisdom. When someone presents you with fake papers, let them believe you're buying it while you quietly collect proof of their deceit. I'll need to go over these with my lawyer, I stated, taking photos of each page. Her smile wavered. Surely, that's not necessary, we're all neighbors here. The coffee in my mug had turned cold outside. The cattle were settling in for the night, their lowing sounds drifting over the land my ancestors had bled to build. I was staring at a woman in my kitchen, surrounded by 4 generations of memories, attempting to steal our most hallowed place with fabricated papers. But Belle had made her first critical misstep. She mistook kindness for weakness. She equated rural with stupid. She believed some country rancher wouldn't have the know-how to fight back. She was about to find out that Montana ranchers don't just understand the land. We also understand the law, and when someone attempts to steal your heritage with forged documents, you don't merely defend your ground. You utterly destroy them. Belle didn't hesitate to turn her fraudulent papers into a tool of aggression. She mobilized the entire county bureaucracy against me. 2 weeks later, County Inspector Martinez was at my door, looking deeply uncomfortable. Sorry, Garrett, I've got a formal complaint about illegal water access restrictions. A lady called headquarters 3 times, insisting on immediate action. We toured the property together, with Martinez just shaking his head. This is absolute horseshit. Your paperwork is flawless. The boundaries are clearly marked. There are no violations whatsoever. Nevertheless, he was obligated to file the official report. She's building a paper trail, trying to make this seem like a long-standing dispute. It's smart, I'll give her that. Diabolical but smart. The real blow came next. Belle convened a community safety meeting at her clubhouse. About 15 neighbors attended, mostly new residents who had never set foot on an actual working ranch. Belle stood at the front with large, poster-sized aerial photographs, pointing as if she were briefing generals before a battle. "This man's cattle are poisoning our children's watershed," she proclaimed, her voice saturated with feigned maternal worry. "His increasingly aggressive posture toward families, using traditional recreational areas points to severe mental instability. We moved here for a peaceful rural lifestyle, not to be intimidated by some feudal rancher who acts like he owns the whole valley." The lies were infuriating, but the financial rumors were what truly stung. Whispers started that inheritance taxes had left me broke, that the ranch was on the verge of failure, and that I would likely sell to developers within months. In ranch country, implying a man can't manage his finances is a direct assault on his character. It was time to retaliate. My grandfather always taught me that the best counter to lies is an overwhelming amount of documentation. So, I hired the county's premier surveyor, who happened to be Martinez's brother-in-law, to conduct GPS boundary mapping. It was $800 well spent when the satellite coordinates proved that Belle's immaculate fence encroached 3 feet onto my property for a length of 200 yards. Then came the security cameras. I installed 8 high-definition units equipped with night vision and cloud storage, covering every inch of access to the lake. The sound of steel posts being driven into the hard Montana earth by the post-hole digger felt like the drumbeats signaling the start of a war. But I also remembered learning about adverse possession laws during my divorce. I knew that continuous trespassing for 5 years could potentially establish a legal claim to property. Every day, I allowed Tucker's circus to continue. I was risking my rights. The cameras would not only document everything but, more importantly, prove that I was actively protecting my land. Within a few days, they captured something priceless. On Saturday morning, Tucker showed up with a complete film crew, lights, boom mics, and even a catering truck. They were filming a commercial for an energy drink, featuring what they called authentic Montana wilderness. The audio recording was invaluable. Tucker could be heard telling the director, "Yeah, this lake belongs to my family. I've been coming here since I was a kid." The guy was born in Phoenix and had only moved here 5 years ago. But as I reviewed more footage, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Tucker wasn't just lying about who owned the land. He was operating a full-fledged commercial enterprise. His Instagram followers had soared to 50,000 after a video he posted of a hidden paradise went viral. Now, dozens of aspiring influencers were paying him $300 each for exclusive access to the Montana lake. Cars were lining the county road every weekend. Strangers were trampling across my pastures, leaving behind trash and agitating the cattle. The smell of abandoned camping equipment mingled with the scent of pine. Shards of broken beer bottles sparkled like landmines in the grass where my livestock grazed. My prize bull, Augustus, named after my great-grandfather, had stopped eating properly. The stress on the cattle from the constant human presence was impacting the entire herd. These weren't just weekend photographers. This was the industrial-scale exploitation of my family's most sacred ground. Then came the small twist that altered the entire situation. Tucker's newest Instagram post featured him constructing a rustic fishing dock at his family's traditional spot. The problem was, he had built it on my property without asking and was charging his clients an extra fee for the authentic experience. The time-lapse video of the construction had amassed 30,000 likes and was still growing, but I had every single second of that construction recorded on my cameras, including audio of Tucker detailing his profit margins to the film crew, commercial trespassing, property damage, and fraud, all documented with his own commentary. That evening, as I sat on my porch sipping whiskey while the cattle settled for the night, I understood that Belle had made a fundamental error in judgment. She believed some simple country rancher wouldn't know how to engage in suburban warfare. She assumed rural meant stupid, and that I would simply capitulate to her forged documents and feigned tears. She was about to discover that Montana ranchers don't just know about land and livestock, we also know about law, politics, and how to use documentation as a weapon of destruction. Her son's social media empire was built on a stolen foundation, and foundations can be demolished much faster than they are built, especially when you are the one in control of the demolition. Belle's subsequent action demonstrated she had learned absolutely nothing from watching her son's documented disaster unfold on my security cameras. 3 of my neighbors came knocking the following Tuesday. The Hendersons, the Patels, and a new family whose name I hadn't yet learned. They looked extremely uncomfortable, shuffling their feet like children being forced to make an apology. "Garrett, we're filing a joint nuisance complaint," Henderson muttered, avoiding my gaze. "The HOA claims your cattle operations are in violation of our subdivision's rural residential harmony standards." I had known Henderson for 3 years. He was a decent man who had even helped me round up stray cattle from the county road. But Belle had clearly gotten to him. "What exactly is the nuisance, Bob?" "Well, it's the smell and the noise. The sounds of the cattle early in the morning are affecting our property values." Property values? There it was. Belle had persuaded them that my ranch, which had been there for over a century before their subdivision existed, was somehow devaluing their investment. The woman was orchestrating a multi-pronged legal assault, trying to create the illusion of widespread community opposition. But her true escalation, which came 3 days later, was a stroke of manipulative genius. I was out checking fence lines when my phone vibrated. It was the sheriff's dispatch. A domestic disturbance call with possible threats of violence. My stomach sank. The address was mine. Deputy Collins showed up within minutes, his body camera recording, looking on edge. "Garrett, we received a call about you threatening a neighbor. A lady claims you became aggressive during a property discussion and implied physical harm." "Which lady?" "Belle Thornwick. She says you told her to stay off your land or else and made threatening gestures." I almost let out a laugh, but Collins was taking it seriously, and in this day and age, accusations can stick, even when they are entirely fabricated. I remembered something my attorney had hammered into me during my divorce. Always remain calm when dealing with law enforcement, never get defensive, and if you have proof, present it in a professional manner. "Deputy, I have security. Cameras that cover every single inch of my property. When exactly did this supposed threat happen?" Collins consulted his notes. "Yesterday, around 4:00 p.m., near your eastern fence line." I took out my phone and opened the cloud storage app. "Let's have a look." The footage was perfect. It showed Belle approaching my fence, me explaining the property boundaries from a distance of 15 feet while speaking in a normal, conversational tone, her screaming at me about rural terrorism and threatening the community, and me simply walking away without raising my voice or making any gestures that could be remotely interpreted as threats. Collins watched the entire clip, shaking his head. "Ma'am clearly has a problem with the truth," he said, making notes in his report. "But Garrett, you should know, she's filing for a restraining order. She claims you have a history of aggressive behavior towards residents of the subdivision." A restraining order? It was brilliant. Really, even if it was ultimately dismissed, the simple act of filing would create a legal record suggesting I was dangerous, unstable, and the aggressor in this conflict, her husband's law firm. A major conflict of interest she had conveniently failed to mention, was likely advising her on every move, but two could play the documentation game. I had been studying Montana property law since our first run-in, learning everything about homestead rights, water law, and harassment statutes. It turns out that filing false police reports is a felony, punishable by up to 2 years in prison. Each false report constitutes a separate criminal offense, and the pattern of harassment I was documenting could support a civil claim for damages, including attorney's fees and harm to my reputation. My counterattack was both swift and precise. First, I filed my own harassment complaint, backed by 47 documented incidents over a 6-month period. Every instance of trespassing, every false accusation, and every attempt to harm my business relationships was timestamped with photographic proof. Next, I retained McKenzie & Associates, the top water rights attorneys in the state. It cost me $5,000 up front, but they confirmed what I had already suspected. My 1887 homestead patent granted me absolute water rights under the federal doctrine of prior appropriation. No HOA, no county, and no state agency could supersede those rights without constitutional due process and just compensation. Bell's insurance gambit was her next masterpiece of manipulation. My liability carrier called me on Thursday morning. "Mr. Holloway, we've received a claim regarding your property creating an attractive nuisance. The HOA is insisting that you pay for additional security patrols around their subdivision. Furthermore, they are demanding a community access easement to your lake. They are threatening a lawsuit if you do not comply." Attractive nuisance is a legal term for a property feature that might entice people, particularly children, into dangerous situations like an unfenced swimming pool, except my lake was encircled by no trespassing signs and security cameras. Hardly a public invitation. Initially, the insurance company sided with Bell. Their main concern was avoiding a lawsuit, not protecting my rights. They threatened to raise my rates unless I resolved the community concerns amicably. But here's what they didn't know. Those security cameras had captured something remarkable. It was Tucker's latest Instagram post, in which he boasted about earning $47,000 in just 3 months from charging exclusive lake access fees. He had unintentionally documented the commercial exploitation of my property, providing perfect evidence that any attractive nuisance was being artificially created by his own illicit business activities. Sometimes, the best defense is simply to let your adversaries hang themselves with their own rope. Bell's desperation became apparent when she called Channel 7 News with her sob story about a wealthy rancher bullying working-class families. I was mending fence posts when my daughter, Skylar, called from college, her voice tense with anxiety. "Dad, you're on the evening news. Some woman is claiming you're threatening families and blocking public access to the lake. They're showing aerial footage of our property." The story ran that night with the headline, "Ranch Owner Denies Lake Access to Community Children." Bell had orchestrated the perfect photo op, complete with crying kids in swimsuits standing at my fence line, holding signs that read, "Let us swim," and "Stop rural bullying." The reporter swallowed her story whole, portraying me as some corporate agriculture tyrant denying innocent families their traditional recreational rights. But what truly revealed Bell's escalating panic was the GoFundMe page she created. Save Public Lake Access. Legal Defense Against Corporate Intimidation. She had raised $12,000 in 2 days, claiming she needed the funds to combat my army of lawyers and safeguard community rights. The comments section was vicious. People from all over the country were calling me a greedy bastard, threatening to boycott Montana beef, and demanding that the governor seize my property for public use. Death threats began pouring in via email and Facebook Messenger. 3 local businesses terminated their contracts with me that week. The feed store, the veterinary clinic, and even the mechanic who had been servicing my equipment for 15 years. It was economic warfare, engineered to force me into submission. But Bell's most savage escalation was an act of pure sabotage. On Saturday morning, my water pump system suffered a catastrophic failure. It was 80-year-old equipment that had seemingly just given out, or so I thought, until I discovered the severed electrical lines and smashed control panel concealed behind the pump house. The repairs cost $8,000, and my cattle were left without water during the hottest week of the summer. The security cameras captured shadowy figures moving near the pump house at 2:00 a.m. on Friday night, but the individuals wore hoodies and kept their faces obscured. It was clever. but not clever enough to avoid leaving tire tracks in the mud. A distinctive tread pattern that matched Tucker's lifted pickup truck. Sheriff Collins investigated but found insufficient evidence for criminal charges. It's remarkable how quickly law enforcement standards can shift when political influence is involved. Belle's husband served on the county hospital board alongside Collins's wife. A coincidence? I'm sure, but every action has a reaction, and I had been studying more than just property law. My daughter, Skylar, a journalism major with her mother's knack for investigation, began looking into Belle's past while I was dealing with the repairs. What she uncovered was explosive. Belle had been terminated from her previous real estate position for falsifying property documents. Online client reviews accused her of swindling elderly sellers with forged paperwork and exorbitant fees. Even better, Belle's husband's bank was under a federal audit for questionable lending practices. This was the same bank that held the construction loans for the subdivision and the mortgages for most of its residents. If that institution were to fail, the property values in Whispering Pines would plummet overnight. Meanwhile, Tucker's Instagram empire was generating its own downfall. His invitation to a Free the Lake party went viral, with 200 people confirming their attendance for a peaceful protest to reclaim community water rights. Except, in influencer language, peaceful protest translates to a drunken invasion armed with professional photography gear. They descended like a plague of locusts on Saturday night. Cars were parked along the county road for half a mile. Strangers hiked across my pastures, laden with coolers, camping equipment, and enough camera gear to shoot a feature film. The scent of marijuana smoke mingled with barbecue charcoal as they established a camp on my lakeshore like a conquering army. The party raged until 3:00 m. Fireworks were launched over the water where my grandmother's ashes lay. Electronic music drowned out the night sounds that had echoed here, unchanged, for generations. When the sun rose to reveal the aftermath, I felt sick to my stomach. There were trampled fence lines, scattered cattle, and a grass fire started by Roman candles that had scorched 40 acres of prime pastureland. The volunteer fire department responded, along with sheriff's deputies and an ambulance for 3 cases of alcohol poisoning. The property damage amounted to $15,000, not including the ecological harm to the wetlands and nesting sites. The police arrested 3 partygoers for underage drinking, but Tucker and Belle had conveniently disappeared before they could be questioned. But while I was documenting the fire damage the next morning, I observed something that changed the entire game. The bill for the county emergency services was addressed to my ranch. Not the subdivision. Every police call, every fire response, and every ambulance run to Whispering Pines was being billed to my property address. I started digging through old records and discovered a clear pattern. For 5 years, every emergency service call used to harass me had been paid for with my own tax dollars. Belle had been using my money to wage war on me. But that revelation led to an even greater discovery. In my grandfather's old filing cabinet, tucked away under decades of receipts for farm equipment, I found a folder labeled County Service District, 1962. Inside were documents that would completely turn this battle on its head. Documents that proved I possessed a legal authority Belle never even knew existed, documents that would allow me to obliterate her perfect suburban kingdom with a single phone call. That manila folder in my grandfather's filing cabinet held the nuclear option I never knew I had. The documents were yellowed with age, bearing official seals from 1962, titled Rural Service District Formation, Cedar Ridge County. My hands actually shook as I read through the legal text, because hidden within the bureaucratic language was the solution to everything. In the 1960s, Montana had established special districts to deliver municipal services to dispersed rural properties. My grandfather's ranch, being the largest land holding in the vicinity, was designated as the anchor parcel for the entire area's emergency services, road maintenance, and utility coordination. But here was the crucial part. The original agreement automatically designated the ranch owner as the legal service district administrator, granting broad oversight powers that were transferred with the ownership of the property, regardless of whether anyone remembered their existence. I was the district supervisor I had been for 3 years, ever since I inherited the ranch, and I had been completely oblivious. The legal structure was astonishing. As the district administrator, I possessed the authority to approve or deny all municipal service contracts for the entire region. This included police patrols, fire department response, emergency medical services, and even the maintenance of the subdivision's access roads. Everything required my signature. More importantly, I had the legal right to audit all district expenditures and to terminate contracts for cause with a 30-day notice. My attorney confirmed it on Monday morning, his voice practically buzzing with excitement. "Garrett, this is entirely legitimate. The 1962 Rural Service District Act is still on the books. These powers were never rescinded or reassigned. You've been unknowingly subsidizing services that primarily benefit the subdivision, while they've been using those very services to harass you." The financial implications were immense. The service district was financed through special property tax assessments based on acreage. My ranch was responsible for 60% of the total budget, approximately $200,000 per year, while the entire HOA subdivision collectively contributed the other 40%. For 5 years, I had been bankrolling my own persecution, every police call Bell made to harass me, every emergency response to Tucker's illegal parties, every patrol car that arrived to intimidate me. All of it had been paid for with my tax money. But the most shocking revelation emerged when we reviewed 20 years of the district's financial records. The spending patterns were nothing short of criminal. There were massive overcharges for security services from companies owned by the business associates of Bell's husband. The HOA had been billing the district for private amenities like pool maintenance, landscaping, clubhouse utilities, and even the lighting for their tennis courts. They had systematically plundered public funds to support their private lifestyle, assuming the country rancher would never notice or comprehend the bureaucratic shell game they were playing. I had discovered their Achilles heel, and it was forged from pure greed. The technicalities were beautiful in their simplicity. Montana's sunshine laws mandated complete transparency for all service district operations. I could demand immediate access to every contract, every invoice, and every payment authorization from the last decade, and what I was sure to find would be sufficient to bring them all down. My authority encompassed the power to terminate contracts with 30 days written notice, audit all expenditures for compliance, and refer any financial irregularities to state and federal prosecutors. I could literally cut off their access to police, fire, and emergency services while demanding restitution for years of embezzlement. But the psychological effect was even more significant. For months, I had been on the defensive, reacting to Bell's attacks and documenting harassment while she dictated the narrative. Now, I held the ultimate trump card, the power to dismantle her entire suburban kingdom with a legal authority she never knew existed. As I sat in my kitchen that evening, my coffee growing cold while I reviewed the documents for the 10th time, I realized this was no longer just about property. This was about seeking justice for every rural landowner who had been bullied by entitled suburban colonizers. Every rancher, farmer, or longtime resident who had watched newcomers arrive and immediately start demanding changes to suit their own preferences. Bell believed she was contending with some isolated country rancher with limited resources and legal expertise. She had no clue she had picked a fight with someone who literally controlled the infrastructure that kept her perfect community running. The service district administrator had been dormant for 3 years. It was time to wake up and exercise some long overdue authority. It was time to teach an HOA president that rural doesn't mean powerless. It means being connected to systems of law and governance that predate her subdivision by generations. On Monday morning, I convened an emergency meeting with my newly formed war council, which consisted of my attorney, my accountant, and one very enthusiastic journalism major, my daughter, who had driven down from college for the occasion. The conference room at Mackenzie and Associates smelled of leather and old law books, the kind of place where fortunes are made and lost with the stroke of a pen. My attorney, Sarah Mackenzie, laid out the service district documents on the mahogany table like they were battle plans. "Garrett, these powers are extraordinary. You have the authority to terminate every municipal service contract with a 30-day notice, but we must be precise about this, document everything, follow the proper procedures, and make it impossible for them to challenge us on procedural grounds." My accountant friend, Pete Morrison, the man who had helped me navigate my divorce and the ranch inheritance, was already immersed in the financial records, his calculator clicking like a machine gun. "Jesus Christ, Garrett, look at these figures. They've been billing the district $400,000 a year for enhanced security services. The market rate for the actual patrol coverage they received would be maybe $80,000. But the irrefutable evidence came from Tucker's own social media, which documented his illegal income: $47,000 in 3 months from charging for lake access, plus an additional $32,000 from corporate sponsorships that used my property as a backdrop. All of it was recorded with timestamps, geolocation data, and his own commentary about profit margins. Skylar had her laptop open, monitoring social media activity and mapping out Belle's network. "Dad, it gets even better. I found links between the security company that's been overcharging you and Belle's husband's bank. They share the same ownership group and business address. They've been operating a kickback scheme through municipal contracts." The strategy took shape over strong coffee and a shared sense of Montana resolve. It would have 3 phases, each engineered to exert maximum pressure while maintaining the legal high ground. Phase 1. Formal notification. I would assert my authority as the district administrator to demand an immediate audit of all financial records, inform all parties of impending contract reviews, and firmly establish my legal position before taking any further action. Phase 2. Systematic service. Termination. I would start by cutting non-essential services. The costly security patrols, emergency landscaping services, and special event coordination. This would let them feel the financial strain while I maintained essential safety services. Phase 3. A public confrontation at the scheduled HOA meeting, complete with full media documentation of the evidence of corruption. The goal was maximum embarrassment, maximum legal exposure, and maximum community impact. Sarah detailed how the sunshine laws would be our shield. Every service district meeting must be public. All financial records are accessible under the Freedom of Information Act. Montana's transparency laws are among the strongest in the country. They won't be able to hide behind closed doors once you start demanding answers. But I also remembered reading about civil forfeiture laws during my research. Property and assets used in the commission of a crime can be seized by the authorities, if we could prove that Tucker's truck was used to transport equipment for his trespassing operations, or that Belle's house was bought with embezzled funds. We might be able to recover damages that went beyond simple restitution. The timing was crucial. Tucker's biggest Instagram event, a wilderness challenge sponsored by energy drink companies, was scheduled in 3 weeks, with an expected 500 participants at his lake. It was the perfect opportunity to document massive commercial trespassing while also demonstrating the need for immediate action. Pete would conduct a forensic audit of 10 years' worth of service district spending, identifying every single questionable transaction. Sarah would prepare civil lawsuits for fraud, defamation, and conversion, while also filing criminal referrals with state and federal prosecutors. Skylar would coordinate with an investigative journalist who was interested in stories of HOA abuse, timing the media coverage for maximum effect. But we also needed allies. Montana politics is built on relationships, and Belle's husband's banking connections meant we needed the support of people with real influence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My neighbor, Chuck Morrison, who was Pete's cousin and whose family had been ranching here since the 1920s, mentioned that County Commissioner Janet Torres was seeking re-election issues that would appeal to rural voters. Janet has been under pressure from developers who want to change the agricultural zoning, Chuck explained. She would love a high-profile case that proves she stands with longtime families against suburban manipulation. Environmental groups were another natural ally. The Montana Wilderness Society had been tracking the damage to pristine ecosystems caused by social media, documenting how Instagram tourism was destroying fragile habitats. The commercialization of my lake fit their narrative perfectly. Even some residents of the subdivision were growing weary of Belle's drama. 3 families had approached Chuck privately, complaining about emergency assessments and questioning the HOA's financial management. They were ready to support transparency and accountability, especially if it meant lower fees for them. The psychological preparation was also essential. This was no longer just about winning. It was about establishing a precedent for rural property rights across the entire state. Every rancher, farmer, and longtime resident facing similar pressures would be watching to see how this unfolded. As we concluded the meeting, Sarah handed me a thick folder filled with legal documents. "Garrett, you're about to become very well known. This case will be studied in law schools. Make sure you're prepared for that kind of scrutiny." Walking out to my truck, breathing in the mountain air that carried the scent of pine and possibility, I realized something fundamental had changed. For months, I had been reacting, defending, and documenting harassment while Belle controlled the narrative. Now, I held the weapons. It was time to go on the offensive. My opening salvo was delivered via certified mail on Tuesday morning. A formal letter addressed to the HOA board, announcing my authority as the Rural Service District Administrator. and demanding an immediate financial audit of all municipal contracts. The letter was crafted with surgical precision. Effective immediately, all service district expenditures require administrator approval. Any unauthorized use of public funds for private subdivision amenities constitutes embezzlement under Montana Criminal Code Section 45-6-316. You have 30 days to provide complete financial records or face service termination proceedings. I sent copies to the county commissioners, the state attorney general, the local media, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. It might have been overkill, but I wanted everyone to be watching when the dominoes began to fall. Belle's panicked reaction was both immediate and spectacular. Within hours, she had called an emergency HOA meeting for that same evening. The email she sent to residents was pure hysteria. Urgent. Rancher threatens community safety. Emergency action required. She claimed I was making terrorist threats against their basic services, endangering children and the elderly through rural extremism. But her true desperation was revealed when she reached out to the governor's office. According to my source in county administration, Martinez's wife worked there. Belle had actually attempted to file a domestic terrorism report, alleging that I was using infrastructure control to threaten the community's survival. The governor's staff reportedly laughed her out of the building. Meanwhile, she retained Pinnacle Crisis Management, a Seattle-based PR firm specializing in reputation damage control. This cost the HOA $37,000 for a 2-week engagement, paid for with community funds without board approval. Just one more act of embezzlement to add to her growing list of crimes. The smear campaign began at once. Fake social media accounts started appearing across various platforms, posting negative reviews of my ranch and claiming I mistreated my animals, polluted waterways, and threatened my neighbors. Anonymous tips flooded state agencies, the IRS, EPA, animal control, and building inspectors, all alleging various violations that would require costly investigations to refute. Tucker escalated his own efforts, posting a tearful video in which he claimed I had threatened him with violence. This crazy rancher said he'd make me disappear if I didn't stop using the community lake. He sobbed, designer tears streaming down his face. I'm scared for my safety, scared for my family. It was a complete fabrication, but the video went viral. Death threats started arriving by the dozens. People were calling me a psychopath and demanding that the authorities arrest me before I snapped. The algorithm thrives on controversy, and Tucker was feeding it exactly what it wanted. But while they were manufacturing drama online, I was methodically building my case. My attorney had filed preliminary injunctions against any further harassment, supported by 47 documented false reports. Each fabricated complaint constituted a separate criminal charge under Montana law. Filing false police reports carries a prison sentence of up to 2 years, and the pattern we had documented suggested an organized conspiracy. Pete's forensic audit was uncovering criminal activity that spanned years. The security company that was billing $400,000 annually was owned by Belle's brother-in-law and was providing services that existed mostly on paper. The actual patrol hours logged were less than 20% of the billed time. They had been stealing approximately $300,000 a year from public funds. The subdivision's landscaping, pool maintenance, and clubhouse utilities had all been fraudulently charged to the service district. Even their tennis court lighting upgrade was billed as emergency road illumination, a level of creative accounting that would have made Bernie Madoff proud. But Belle's most desperate act was pure sabotage, designed to create an emergency that would justify her actions. On Thursday night, someone cut my fence lines in 3 different places, allowing cattle to wander onto the county roads during rush hour traffic. The sabotage was meticulously planned, with the cuts made in areas where the security cameras couldn't see, and timed to cause maximum chaos and danger. My phone began buzzing at 6:00 a.m. with frantic calls. 40 head of cattle were scattered across Highway 93, causing significant traffic delays and several near accidents. Sheriff's deputies, highway patrol, and emergency services scrambled to manage the situation. It resulted in $12,000 in emergency roundup costs, plus liability exposure for any accidents. An anonymous call to dispatch claimed that I had deliberately released dangerous animals in retaliation for the community's opposition to my terrorist demands. It was the perfect narrative to support Belle's claims about my mental instability, but my security upgrade included motion sensors along the fence lines and infrared cameras in the blind spots, We captured everything. Tucker's lifted pickup truck, 3 figures in hoodies, and the deliberate sabotage of fence posts designed to fail under pressure. Better yet, our audio recordings picked up their conversation. Make it look like the crazy rancher lost his shit. One voice said, Bell wants this to look like he's dangerous. Sheriff Collins finally had undeniable proof of a criminal conspiracy. Tucker's friends were arrested within hours, charged with criminal mischief, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit property damage. Tucker managed to avoid arrest by claiming he wasn't there. But the GPS data from his truck told a different story. Bell's final, desperate move was to call a town hall meeting, where she planned to claim that my ranch operations threatened the community's survival and demand county intervention. Through eminent domain proceedings, she had no idea she was walking into her own public execution. The criminal charges filed against Tucker's fence-cutting crew sparked a community revolt that Bell never anticipated. 3 kids from the subdivision were arrested for felony property damage and were now facing up to 5 years in state prison. Their parents, decent people who had been manipulated by Bell's lies, suddenly realized that their children had been enlisted in a criminal conspiracy by the very HOA president they had trusted. But Bell's reaction revealed the true depth of her corruption. She hired a criminal defense attorney, Marcus Webb, and charged his $60,000 retainer directly to the HOA's funds without board approval. When residents questioned this expenditure at an emergency meeting on Thursday, she claimed that using community money was appropriate for defending residents against rural aggression. The backlash was immediate and severe. Homeowners began demanding financial transparency, questioning years of inflated assessments and mysterious security upgrades. 3 board members resigned rather than risk liability for Bell's unauthorized spending. Property values in the subdivision dropped by 15% in 2 weeks as news of the ongoing legal battles spread. Meanwhile, my documentation was uncovering a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Pete's forensic audit had exposed shell companies, kickback schemes, and systematic theft that would have impressed organized crime. The security firm that was billing $400,000 annually was owned by Bell's husband's business partners and was providing services that existed mainly on paper. They had stolen nearly $2 million over a period of 5 years. But the media war was intensifying, and Schuyler's connections in investigative journalism were beginning to pay off. Channel 7's follow-up story featured interviews with 3 families who had been pressured into signing false complaints against me. Elderly residents revealed that Bell had threatened them with foreclosure proceedings through her husband's bank if they didn't support her community safety initiatives. The reporter had also uncovered Tucker's tax evasion. IRS documents showed that he had earned over $200,000 from illegal lake access fees, while reporting an income of only $37,000 on his tax returns. Federal charges were now pending for tax fraud and unreported commercial activity. Tucker's Instagram empire was collapsing under the weight of scrutiny. Sponsors dropped him after learning about the trespassing and fraud allegations. His follower count plummeted as people realized his family lake content was built on stolen property. Even his energy drink partnership canceled their Wilderness Challenge event, but Bell's most desperate move proved she had completely lost touch with reality. She approached me privately on Saturday evening, finding me as I was repairing the fence damage from her sabotage operation. The scent of her fierce perfume was overpowering as she walked across my pasture in designer heels, stumbling on the uneven ground like a fish out of water. "Garrett, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "This has all gotten out of hand." I continued my work, letting my body camera record everything. "What is there to discuss, Bell? I can make this all go away. $50,000 in cash if you drop the legal action and let Tucker continue using the lake occasionally. Just for personal stuff, no more commercial activity. Bribery on camera with audio. She had just handed me a federal felony conviction. You're offering to pay me with the money you stole from my tax payments?" Her composure shattered completely. "Look, maybe Tucker got a little carried away with the business side of things, but boys will be boys. And yes, there might have been some accounting irregularities with the service district, but nothing malicious, just some misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. $2 million in theft was a misunderstanding. "I'll resign from the HOA board," she continued, her desperation making her voice shrill. "We'll sell the house, we'll move away. We'll never bother you again. Just please don't destroy our lives over some stupid lake." Some stupid lake. The place where 4 generations of my family were buried. where my grandmother's ashes rested, where my great-grandfather had built our first home with his own 2 hands. She still had no comprehension of what she had tried to steal. But her attempt at a negotiation revealed something critical. She knew the federal investigation was closing in. Her husband's bank was facing criminal charges for loan fraud and money laundering. The house they had purchased with stolen money was about to be seized through civil forfeiture proceedings. Their perfect suburban life was collapsing around them. The service termination notices I had issued were creating precisely the pressure I had intended. Police patrols for the subdivision now cost the market rate of $180,000 annually, instead of the $30,000 they had been paying. Emergency services now required prepayment or private insurance. Road maintenance became the HOA's responsibility, at a cost of $85,000 per year. The emergency assessment notices arrived in mailboxes on Monday morning. $3,200 per household to cover the actual costs of these services. Most residents couldn't afford the sudden increase, which created a financial crisis that threatened the survival of the entire community. Tuesday's emergency HOA meeting was standing room only. Angry homeowners demanded answers about years of financial mismanagement. Several residents announced their intention to sue Bell personally for the recovery of stolen funds. Others were exploring legal options to dissolve the HOA entirely rather than face bankruptcy as a result of her corruption. But the ideal venue for the final confrontation was already on the schedule. The county commissioner's public hearing on service district management, set for Thursday at 2 p.m. All parties were required to present evidence and testimony. With full media access and public record documentation, it was time to end this war once and for all. On Thursday afternoon, the Cedar Ridge County Commissioner meeting room was packed well beyond its fire code capacity. Local TV crews, newspaper reporters, and live-stream cameras had transformed the typically quiet government chamber into a media circus. The smell of nervous sweat, mingled with old coffee and leather-bound law books, created an atmosphere thick with anticipation. I sat at the front table with Sarah Mackenzie, our evidence meticulously organized in color-coded binders thick, enough to stop a bullet. Across the aisle, Belle huddled with her high-priced legal team. 3 attorneys from Billings who had driven down for what they likely assumed would be routine damage control. The gallery was divided like a wedding that had gone terribly wrong. On the left side were ranchers, longtime residents, and environmental advocates, all there to support property rights. On the right were residents of the subdivision, most of them looking confused and angry about the emergency assessments they couldn't afford. In the back, Skylar was live-streaming the entire event for her journalism project. Commissioner Janet Torres called the hearing to order, her voice cutting through the low murmur. We are here to address allegations regarding the financial management and administrative authority of the Rural Service District. Mr. Holloway, as the complainant, you have the floor. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 4 generations of my family watching from beyond. Commissioners, what I am about to present represents the largest municipal fraud case in the history of Cedar Ridge County. The first exhibit was my service district documentation, the yellowed papers from 1962 that established my legal authority as administrator. For 3 years, I unknowingly held budget oversight powers for every municipal service in this region, powers that Mrs. Thornwick exploited to steal nearly $2 million in public funds. Bell's lead attorney attempted to interrupt. Objection, Your Honor. This isn't a trial, Counselor. Torres snapped back. Mr. Holloway has the floor. I opened the financial analysis binder. The numbers told the story more effectively than words ever could. My ranch pays 60% of this district's budget, which amounts to roughly $200,000 annually. Those funds were systematically diverted to subsidize private subdivision amenities through a series of fraudulent contracts. The exhibits mounted like evidence in a war crimes tribunal. Security contracts billing $400,000 for services that were worth only $80,000. Landscaping charges for private HOA property billed as emergency road maintenance. Pool chemicals and tennis court lighting charged as public safety infrastructure. But the real bombshell was Tucker's social media evidence. Mrs. Thornwick's son documented his own crimes, earning over $200,000 by selling access to my private property while simultaneously evading federal taxes. Every Instagram post, every commercial transaction, every sponsored event was a theft of my family's heritage. The audio recordings played through the chamber's sound system with crystal clarity. Tucker bragging about his profit margins to his film crew. Bell coaching false statements for police reports. The fence-cutting conspiracy captured on infrared video, with their own voices providing the narration. "Your Honor," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "They didn't just steal my land, they stole my family's legacy and sold it back to strangers for Instagram content." The mic drop moment arrived when I revealed the bribery attempt. The recording of Bell's offer to pay me $50,000 for my silence played through the speakers. Her admission of accounting irregularities echoing off the chamber walls. The sound of her designer heels stumbling across my pasture. The desperation in her voice as she realized her suburban kingdom was crumbling filled the room. Commissioner Torres leaned forward, her expression as hard as granite. "Mrs. Thornwick, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Bell's attorney whispered frantically in her ear, but she pushed him aside and stood up. Her voice trembled like autumn leaves. "These are all just misunderstandings, accounting errors. Perhaps some miscommunication about service boundaries we never intended." "Mrs. Thornwick," Torres cut in. "We have just listened to recordings of you offering bribes and admitting to financial irregularities. This goes far beyond miscommunication." The community testimony that followed was devastating. Chuck Morrison described similar harassment attempts on neighboring ranches. 3 elderly residents of the subdivision testified about the pressure tactics and foreclosure threats they had faced. Environmental scientist Dr. Rebecca Martinez documented the ecological damage caused by the commercial exploitation of the lake, showing before and after photos that elicited gasps from the audience. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. Margaret Henderson, the neighbor who had been coerced into signing false complaints, stood up with tears streaming down her face. "We trusted her," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "Bell told us Garrett was dangerous, that our property values would collapse if we didn't act. She threatened us with foreclosure through her husband's bank if we didn't support her. We were terrified." The commissioners voted unanimously on every motion. Terminate all HOA service contracts pending a full investigation. Refer the financial irregularities to state and federal prosecutors. Support my authority as district administrator and commend my efforts in exposing municipal corruption. Sheriff Collins announced criminal investigations into embezzlement, conspiracy, tax evasion, and filing false police reports. The FBI's white-collar crime unit was taking over the financial aspects of the case. Tucker was now facing federal charges for tax fraud and commercial trespassing. As the media swarmed the exits, Bell tried to slip out through a side door, only to be confronted by angry subdivision residents demanding answers about their emergency assessments. Her perfect suburban facade had crumbled in 2 hours of documented truth. The headline in Friday's paper said it all. HOA president arrested in massive fraud scheme. Rural service district corruption exposed. 6 months later, justice tasted like morning coffee on my porch as I watched the sunrise paint the lake where my family's legacy would never again be threatened. Bell received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay $400,000 in restitution. Tucker was given community service, 5 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from monetizing any social media content. His 3 fence-cutting accomplices served 6 months in the county jail and were also ordered to pay restitution for property damage. The settlement from the civil lawsuit was even sweeter. $500,000 in damages, plus the seizure of Tucker's truck and all the camera equipment used in his trespassing operations. The proceeds from the sale of Bell's house went into escrow, and her husband's bank collapsed under a federal investigation, taking their remaining assets with it. But the money wasn't. The real victory was justice. The new HOA leadership issued a public apology at a packed community meeting and established the Holloway Accord, a formal recognition of historic ranch operations and a permanent protection against any future interference. They replaced Bell's cronies with decent people who understood that rural communities thrive on cooperation, not colonization. Access to the lake for commercial purposes was permanently banned by a court order, with any violations carrying automatic felony charges. Any commercial activity on my property was now a federal crime, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The ecosystem began to recover almost immediately. Waterfowl returned. The invasive weeds that had been introduced by Instagram tourists started to die off, and the natural balance that my great-grandfather had protected was finally restored. I used the recovered money to establish the Rural Heritage Protection Fund, which provides legal assistance to landowners facing similar HOA abuse. Within 6 months, we had helped 47 families across Montana defend their property rights against suburban colonizers. The fund grew to over $2 million as donations poured in from ranchers, farmers, and rural residents nationwide who had survived their own battles with entitled developers. The scholarship program for agricultural students became my personal source of pride. In its first year, 12 kids from ranching families received full college funding, with priority given to those studying land management, environmental science, and agricultural law. Skylar changed her major to investigative journalism, inspired by our fight and determined to expose rural injustice wherever she found it. But the broader impact of our case exceeded anything I could have hoped for. The Montana legislature passed the Rural Property Rights Protection Act, which strengthened the oversight of service districts and mandated transparency in municipal contracting. HOA financial abuse was reclassified as a felony with mandatory minimum sentences. The law was nicknamed the Bell Bill in honor of our case. National property rights organizations began using our documentation as educational material, teaching rural landowners how to research their legal authorities and defend themselves against harassment. The story appeared in legal textbooks, agricultural journals, and documentary films about land rights in America. A year later, we hosted the first annual Rural Heritage Days Festival, which drew 5,000 visitors to celebrate agriculture, conservation, and community cooperation. The event showcased sustainable ranching practices, environmental protection, and the economic benefits of working with longtime residents instead of against them. Tucker's former Instagram followers were now learning about responsible land stewardship, wildlife conservation, and the real work required to maintain Montana's natural beauty. The lake became an educational site where university students could study ecosystem restoration and sustainable recreation management. The local businesses that had boycotted me during Bell's smear campaign returned with apologies and renewed contracts. The feed store manager admitted that he had been pressured by threats to the bank loan he held with Bell's husband's institution. It was economic terrorism, but we had survived and were now thriving. Standing by the lake last weekend, watching my daughter teach environmental science students about watershed protection, I thought about my great-grandfather, Augustus. He had homesteaded this land with nothing but his own determination and the legal documents that established his rights. A century later, those same documents had protected his legacy from suburban colonizers who believed that money and political connections could trump law and justice. The water lapped against the stones where Grandma Eleanor's ashes rested, carrying memories and wisdom forward to new generations. Meadowlarks called across the pastures where my cattle grazed peacefully, no longer stressed by Instagram tourists and commercial exploitation. Sometimes, bullies pick fights they are not equipped to win. My grandfather always said, "The land teaches you patience, but it also teaches you justice." When someone tries to steal your heritage, you don't just fight back. You make sure they can never do it to anyone else. Drop a comment about your own HOA nightmare. You might be holding more power than you realize, and smash that subscribe button, because next week I'm sharing the story of how a retired teacher took down an entire corrupt school board with nothing but a calculator and a series of public records requests. The land endures, justice prevails, and Montana ranchers do not back down from bullies who mistake kindness for weakness. Another day, another HOA drama concluded. If this story made you shake your head in disbelief or pump your fist in triumph, hit that like button. Share your own HOA experience in the comments below, and subscribe so you never miss another battle in the war against bullies.